Greetings, Woodsian School of Lifers and so on. We are here for week 3, in which we actually try to clarify what business analysis is all about. I am Bob Churchill, and I've been doing computer simulation for over 30 years, which is how I learned all these skills that go into performing business analysis. I did that in a number of contexts, in a number of different organizations, in locations all over the world. And that's how I got to see both the solution aspect and the management aspect of business analysis. These slides are available on my website under the portfolio tab and under presentations. They're hosted in the Reveal.js framework. So there are live web pages, there are embedded links in them all the time. So every place you see these orange links, they may appear a different color originally, but every place you see something a little different, it's a link to a longer article or set of materials on my website, or link to some external resource. So I've worked in a number of industries, built simulations and other solutions for many different applications. And simulations themselves call into use many different architectural considerations that are more general to computing. So there's a thing called Babok, which is this big honking orange book that the IIBA puts out, and that's the handbook, is the body of knowledge for doing computer simulation. Let me do one thing here. All right, so I will give you the definition of business analysis straight out of the Babok. I usually don't like to quote the Babok too directly, but in this case, the wording is so good that I can't come up with anything better. So, to quote, business analysis is the practice of enabling change in an enterprise by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. Business analysis enables an enterprise to articulate needs and the rationale for change, and to design and describe solutions that deliver value. There are a few other things to think about. The practice is difficult to get a mental grip on because it's nebulous, but it's also huge. I taught last week about doing a dance called Balboa, which is kind of an obscure vernacular partner jazz dance from the swing era that grew up in Southern California. And what they always say about Balboa is it's a dangerous dance, so it's more about what the dancers are feeling together than it is about what people see from the outside. And they also say, I can't always tell you when you are doing it, but I can tell you when you're not doing it. So it's a very strange beast. A lot of people have different conceptions of what it is, and many people take a fairly limited view. I take a more expansive view. It can involve strategy and tactics and operations, any of those, all of them. It can be performed as a project or across the entire environment. So that makes it nebulous also. It's about understanding where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. And in the end, it's about stuff that moves. It's about trying to solve problems. And this is really the biggest thing. You're trying to affect change in some beneficial way. It doesn't take any analysis to keep doing the same thing. But if you want to do something different and hopefully better, that involves change. And if you're going to do that, you might as well analyze it and do it right. I will say that any taxonomy you give is necessarily always going to be lacking. And the same is true with the business analysis description. So we have to start someplace, which is why I start describing my framework from a particular context. One thing we also want to think about is there are different but related perspectives on how to do the process. And the Babok talks about 5 different perspectives. The first one is agile. And I say often that agile is problematic. It was created to address a certain series of problems that were endemic to the industry. And now it's a little bit of a scam. It's too formalized. It is too much a cottage industry of consultants and techniques that kind of miss the point. It's really all about communication and adaptability. That's in the end what it's about. So business analysis can certainly be viewed from that perspective. Business intelligence is all about the data and knowing what's going on in every way. It's the data that goes through, is modified, and spits out of your business or organization. It's the parameters that describe your operations. It's knowing what's going on with customers, suppliers, competitors, and so on. All that is business intelligence. A lot of business analysis work seems to be tied up in information technology projects, but that isn't the only reason to do the work. It's really germane to problem solving in group work and organizational efforts on a much larger and more general scale. Business architecture is about how the entire business is formed, how it's managed, how it's shaped, how it's inspired, and so on. And me coming out of process simulation of various kinds, I really approach this largely from the perspective of business process management. Physical and information stuff comes in, it gets worked on, and it goes out. And if you know the acronym SOPOC and COPUS, which is supplier inputs, process outputs, and customers, and COPUS is simply that in the reverse, so you can unpeel the process or design it from your goal backwards instead of how it's going forward. Those are important parts. I'll talk about those in a future talk. So business analysis rules. This one is fascinating to me because when I wrote these out, I realized that for the most part, nobody goes to college to or gets any other training to start their career as a business analyst. Maybe somebody with an MBA will do that, or somebody who gets a generalized business degree. But in general, you start from one of the rules on the right side, and then you move to the ones on the left. And I need to reverse the text on that total brain part there. Yeah, that's really bizarre how I did that. Anyway, business analysis, you end up doing a lot of things. Scrum product owner, for example, is actually a BA role. Many people think of business analysts only in terms of doing the requirements, but of course they should work continuously across the whole life cycle of any effort. One thing I meant to say also is that when people say they're a dentist or a plumber or a mechanic or an engineer, you have a pretty good idea of what they do. But when you say you're any of these things on the left, that is actually, yeah, my text was right. Okay. So based on last week, we'll do a brief review here. This is the framework that I described. You start with project planning and you do a close at the end. And not all business analysis work is done in the context of a project, but you still generally have those. In the intended use is what you're trying to do the improvement for, or the change, or build a new thing. So it's why you're doing the work. The assumptions and capabilities and so on, it's lifted here early on, but it's really embedded in the process all the way through. Then you figure out what's going on now. That's the as-is state. For various reasons, I call that conceptual modeling. That actually takes place in many contexts, but as a place to start, let's assume we're going to start with what we have and change from there. Then we deal with all kinds of data to quantify and characterize what we discovered in the conceptual modeling phase. Then we're going to do an abstract aspect of the to-be state, which is we're going to define requirements. There are two kinds. Functional describes what the solution does. Non-functional describe what the solution is. And those are about the stakeholder and somewhat about the solution. The design is actually a proposed solution, and maybe you'll generate several possibilities and select the best one to actually implement. Then you implement it, then you test it. And there are two aspects of testing: figuring out whether what you built actually works is verification, and figuring out whether it solves your stated problem is validation. And then maybe you'll do some kind of accreditation. So that's what I conversationally derived last week while asking you to think about building a simulation for some purpose of a system that already exists. And the reason I do that is because I come out of computer simulation from a long career, and also because any business or enterprise system, it can be thought of as a human-in-the-loop simulation. Even serving coffee at Starbucks involves a process that many people and products and informational items pass through. So here I streamline and simplify the different phases, and here I really show all the phases the way they're actually done. This is the way I think of doing business analysis. And again, all the steps are here. What are you going to do? What's going on now? What do you need? How are we going to solve the problem? Then let's go ahead and solve it and verify and validate that we did solve it. Again, on many of these slides, I have links to more information, and you're invited to go read those articles and other materials. So the reason I show the information this way is because you don't just march through and do all this stuff, spit out the end, and declare yourself done. What you actually end up doing is within each phase you iterate, and that means talking to each other. You document, you negotiate, you review, you correct. And not only do you do that within each phase, you also do it between phases. So the classic case of this is test and implementation. So you implement, then you test, you find mistakes, you change the implementation, you keep doing that till you're done. But in a more general sense, that happens all the way through the process, between all the phases, going right back to the definition of the project you're actually defining. Now, again, that big honking book I show you is set up in the following way. It is called a body of knowledge, and it starts with the basic definition of business analysis. Then it goes into the knowledge areas in chapters 3 through 8. And what that's all about is describing in its way how you work through the different phases, but it defines the phases differently, and I'll explain why in a minute. It talks about some underlying competencies, then it talks about some techniques, and it talks about the perspectives last. And then it has supplementary stuff. So I actually map out the 6 phases it talks about, or the 6 knowledge areas it talks about in chapters 3 through 8. There are 6 chapters. And then I list my framework phases here. And I put a strong X in the grid where I think there's a very solid correlation where something I'm talking about matches what's going on in the book, and smaller, darker X to describe where there's a connection and a crossover, but it's not as strong. And what you see is things flow from the upper left to the lower right. So the Babok is still telling you a story of how you work through a problem, but it's doing it in a different way. And I think it's a valid way. I think I know what the IIBA wants to avoid is being prescriptive in any way. So that's why they talk about this, things this way. They don't want to tell you what to do or give you a formula, do this, do this, do this, and like a cookie cutter procedure. But I think they carried that out a little too far. And of course, my framework is not meant to be a cookie cutter list of things to do either. It's meant to be a guideline for giving you situational awareness so you know what range of things are appropriate to do in every situation. So I have created kind of a unified theory of business analysis, which I'll go through one by one. One very important distinction I'll make between aspects of business analysis is I'll differentiate between the solution and the engagement. So the solution is what you're creating in terms of implementation, change, building new things, improving things. That's the goal of the work. The engagement is how you do the work, the steps you take, the techniques you apply. And going back to the rules, people tend to start out their careers doing work in just one of these areas. People might start off as testers, implementers, and requirements gatherers, right? But they tend not to do the other things or be involved in the entire scope of what's going on until they've been around a little while and have some experience and some appreciation for what everybody else is doing in the process. There's a great scene in the movie called Gung Ho where everyone's learning each other's jobs. And I think it was one actor goes in the middle of that points to a guy spraying rust proofing on the bottom of cars, not there, randomly waving, there. He points specifically. So it's all about working together to do your best job. The Babog lists 50 specific techniques that they will apply. I made an additional pass a few years ago to see whether I thought they applied to either the solution primarily or the engagement primarily, or were applicable to both. And I found while doing our weekly mentoring sessions with the Tampa IIBA that I need to probably revisit these and expand my horizon somewhat. I found my view is too limited, so what we'll be doing, we'll be spending the next few weeks slowly working through the various techniques, and we will have a discussion about when different techniques apply. So my logic is in the article at the link, but it's going to be updated. It's always good to rethink about things and get other people's perspective. The next thing I think about when doing business analysis is the tools I use in terms of software. So there are really two kinds of tools, one that aid in collaboration and communication, and ones that are involved in analysis and design and implementation. And, I wrote code for decades in several high-level languages, and none of those even make this list. This list comes from surveys I gave a number of participants when I gave my first series of 5 generalized talks, all of which may be found on my website in both slides and often in video form. You notice that the most general tools are listed near the top. I'm sure some of the collaboration tools have drifted some as different things are happening in the industry. I will notice that Excel and Visio are very important and powerful tools in business analysis. I live and die by those things. Your mileage may vary. The next thing I wanted to talk about was that all these different phases can be done in different ways. So in waterfall, in theory, you do all the phases in order, but as a practical matter, nobody just marches through to the end, declares done, and off you go. There's always iteration and communication within and between phases. In Agile and Scrum, that's even more true. You've got some people putting stuff into the backlog. That work usually involves the first 3 phases, and then the backlog is groomed and prioritized, and implementation and design teams pluck stuff off the backlog and implement and release it. If you can have a hybrid where the major design is kind of done up front, and then the more detailed and ongoing implementation stuff is done in kind of a Scrum-like way. I'll further differentiate between improving the existing project, which is the original context I'm working from when I draw out how the work in my framework or way of thinking is conducted. But if you're starting from scratch, i.e., starting when nothing already exists, all the conceptual modeling stuff, the discovery data collection, it actually happens within the design and not as a separate thing, giving you the as is. And if you're doing simulation, the building a simulation is an entire self-contained process on its own. The final thing I'll tell you as far as my unified theory goes is the relationship between business analysis and project management. I think of project management, for those of you who know the OOV, you'll see all these concerns in the leftmost column in the phases in across the top, and that business analysis happens to occur just in general across the executing and monitoring and control phases. And it really spans all those areas listed on the leftmost column. Project managers and business analysts, particularly senior ones, are sometimes called frenemies. They seem to be at odds, but in reality, they should work together. They can be as much overlap as you want. You should definitely do what works and not stick to silos. Again, the more everybody knows about everybody else's point of view, the better things are going to go. And the last slide I have for you is there are a ton of different ways to approach actually solving problems. And these are kind of specific considerations. The business analysis framework I've developed is kind of a meta approach that allows people to work together to apply these insights and solve problems using any of these and every other methodology and consideration you can think of. I've listened to a gentleman, if you're familiar with Tom Woods and familiar with the Mises Institute, and familiar with Hunter Hastings' Economics for Business podcast, you'll know of a gentleman named Bob Luddy. Luddy, sorry. He runs a business the way you're supposed to run it and thinks about all these things and applies them relentlessly. And that's the way a business should be run. I will talk about many, if not all of these in future weeks. And finally, this and all other information can be found at my website. That is my contact information. And hopefully you found this to be interesting. Are there any questions? Welcome, Bernie.
Hi there, Bob. Sorry, I made it a little late this morning.
No problem.
No questions. It's just packed with a lot of information. I definitely will have to drill down.
Well, I will be slicing and dicing this from many different angles. I know one of the problems we're having, some of the people I'm working with now and trying to start up a new business, is not a lot of people really understand what business analysis is. So I'm trying to throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall to try to say different things to get you to understand it. It's one of those things where I remember learning DB3 plus back in 1988, and I'd have to read the manual and do stuff, but I didn't understand what was happening. But the more I did stuff, the more I learned how to read the manual, and then the more I understood how to do stuff, and it's iterative. And if you worked in large projects or with other people or across many different organizations, you will see that this framework starts to make a lot more sense. I often tell the story that when I worked for Westinghouse, building nuclear power plant simulators, it was a large division, had a lot of large long-term projects going on. It would take 2 or 3 years to build a site-specific power plant simulator. And HP was brought in to do an analysis of our project management techniques, and we got a 4.2 out of 5. But all the managers and all the participants in the process said, you know, this is a real struggle. I don't think this is getting out where the problems are. And over the years, as I've developed this framework and thought about what it all means, I now have verbiage to understand where the bodies were buried, what was going on. It's a context that works for me. And actually, a big part of what was going on, and not to say we did not get really high quality working simulators out the door, but it was a question of there was too much Sturm und Drang and way too much wasted motion, and that was all due to poor communication and lack of feedback in the right places. And when you understand all that in a situation that you have experience with, it'll really come into its own, your understanding based on this formulation. And like I said, the Babcock tells the same story as I do, just in a different way. And I'm seeing more and more people out there coming to a similar conclusion.
Bob, I empathize with what you said about Agile. And I'm wondering if you ever got a chance to work within the Kanban framework. Did you find that it addressed some of your reservations, or was it the whole thing just orthogonal to what you're talking about?
It's the same thing, really. The only difference, in my understanding, between Kanban and Scrum, the core difference, as I understand it, is that Scrum says we're going to do X amount of work and we'll use whatever resources we need to. And Kanban, it's less maybe sprint driven and it's more continuous, but the main thing is you do what you can with the resources that you have. And that's the only difference. Outside of that, it's really all about communication, picking problems up and solving them. So I mean, you could talk about Scrum and Kanban and Scrumban and Safe and everything else. At the end of the day, it's really just getting people to talk to each other and communicate and build up an understanding in the context. One thing I'll talk about in a couple weeks probably is the concept of requirements traceability, and I'm a big believer in drawing pictures of everything. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and animation is 1,000 pictures, right? And that really enhances understanding and situational awareness. And I think when people see that, it'll maybe incrementally help people understand things. One other thing I'll say about Agile is that it's kind of conflated with the XP or extreme programming. And a lot of people will say, all these programming practices are part of Agile, and you can't be Agile, meaning quick to respond effectively, unless you've got all these programming practices in place. And A, that's too IT-centric. And B, really, even if you're doing waterfall, you can have a good IT shop or a bad IT shop. And what Agile, saying that you want to be fast and responsive is kind of beside the point. Agile is about seeing where you're at, making corrections and moving forward. And that's really separate from having an effective IT shop. They're kind of like a pair of scissors. They work together really well, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. Anything else, fellas? All right, next week I will talk about the details of what goes on in each phase, and we'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for being here with me and asking questions today, and I will have the videos up and linked before too long.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you guys.